All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our conversation about rural issues this morning. As we wait for a few more people to get into the call, wanted to throw out a couple brief housekeeping items. This, of course, is the Democratic Business Council of Northern Virginia. My name is Chris King. I'm the president of the organization. You can learn more about us by visiting our website at dembiz.org. That's DEMBIZ.org. We, of course, would love for you to become a member and or a sponsor or a benefactor. We do appreciate your support because it does take some resources to put on these webinars and all of our events. So thank you in advance for that. Also want to recognize our benefactors to the organization, Carlos Del Toro, our great friend of a long time, and myself as well. And we hope to add to those names very soon with you all. So again, thank you for joining us and thank you for your support. A brief note about the run of show today. I'll have some questions for delegates Rasoul and Hurst, and then we will get into some questions from you, the audience. Feel free to punch those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be selecting those as we run through the program. We're here for about an hour or so, and so we hope to cover a lot of ground, and we're really looking forward to a great conversation. All right, so without any further ado, I want to introduce my two fantastic panelists. Delegate Sam Rasoul was elected in 2014 to represent Virginia's 11th district in the House of Delegates, which covers the city of Roanoke. He's also a Southwest Virginia native, I believe Roanoke native, in fact. And Delegate Chris Hurst was elected in 2017 in one of the most watched House of Delegates races, certainly that year, and really almost across the country. It was the subject of a great documentary called Virginia 12th. Delegate Hurst represents city of Pulaski County, city of Radford, parts of Giles County, and also Blacksburg. So, gentlemen, I know you're busy. Appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a program, quite frankly, that I've wanted to do for a long time. The urban-rural divide, I think, is one of the defining aspects of this country. In fact, it almost prevented this country from existing in the first place. The founders butted heads over this from day one, and that really hasn't changed since then. More recently, leading up to 2016, it seems like we were hearing a lot about demographic changes and getting out the vote, and then the 2016 election happened, and it was really just an incredibly harsh reminder that that things hadn't quite changed as much as people thought they might have. And rural voters really made their voices heard and came out strong for Donald Trump, obviously delivering him the White House. So wanted to start with just a very basic question. You both live and work in Southwest Virginia. Delegate Rasoul, we'll start with you. What brought you here and what keeps you here?
Yeah, well, my parents were on a road trip years ago, and when they were first getting started, they stopped here because we had some relatives here on their way down to Florida, as they were in Ohio. Before you knew it, they similar to how many immigrant families work. They found a business here. They found a small corner store, and then the rest is history. That's how we spread our roots. So I'm the oldest of 4 children, and all of my siblings went to Northern Virginia, where you came from, Chris. I stayed here just because I love the area. I think it's got a great balance of so many wonderful resources. And now, have my family with 3 kids, and happy to be here.
All right. Delegate Hurst.
Yeah, and Chris, for me, it was being a TV reporter and coming from Philadelphia, but and going to school in Boston. But when you're trying to get on TV, you go anywhere in the country that'll take you. And I had known Roanoke as a place along the way to go visit my grandmother in North Carolina. But you come here, and I remember going on a tour of Roanoke when I first came here for the job interview at Channel 7, and I just quickly fell in love with the area. And I feel like that's a huge growing aspect of our population now, along I-81 and in rural Virginia, particularly in Roanoke and the New River Valley, are people who are coming here for work or for jobs, which is a little bit of a different dynamic than what we've been seeing, periodically in this area. But I think it's really great to see that we're starting to actually grow the city in some pretty transformational ways. I mean, to be over 100,000 people and to keep on seeing a lot of young professionals and new families moving into the area, I think is part of the story of rural Virginia now.
Right. And of course, well, first of all, about Roanoke, it does have a phenomenal industrial railroad vibe that's held over from the real heyday of Norfolk Southern. And that really is present throughout all the architecture. It's got a great river running through it. And of course, a major demand driver in the Carillion healthcare system. And so, Chris, your district is further south, about 45 minutes around the Blacksburg area. What is the nature of that district?
Yeah, so ours is really guarded around by the two major colleges that we have, Radford University and Virginia Tech. And I think a lot of the issues that we see in rural Virginia, to me, while we want to make sure that we are thinking of other people in places that don't have as large a population, but when you really think about how do you bring about new resources and new opportunities to an area of Virginia, I think the question is how do you keep it rural and all of the wonderful characteristics and hallmarks that we use to define that word, while also trying to get an increase of population in some of these areas that have seen just population decreases over many, many years. Because without that population, you really can't get the attention that's necessary in order to get all of the things that you need for your area, things like broadband internet, schools, access to healthcare. So what we have in our district is Virginia Tech and Radford. And the biggest question that we are faced with is how do those institutions grow to benefit the surrounding community, but how do they grow in a sustainable way that also, maintains the way of life that we enjoy and are seeking when we come here and live in this area.
That's right. And a lot of that is just talent retention, I feel like. People graduate from a place like Virginia Tech or Radford, and how do you keep them here? Are there enough jobs? Is there enough industry? Is there enough infrastructure to let them be entrepreneurs or do, spread their wings from a career standpoint? What are you seeing as far as that is concerned, Sam, here in Roanoke?
Yeah, Roanoke has enjoyed a pretty low unemployment rate absent COVID, and that's credited largely to having, by one statistic, like the second most diverse economy in the Commonwealth. And so while we were planted here by the railroad, as one of the reasons why you're here, Chris, is the medical school. We've had a variety of interests that have planted here. We hope to continue to see that grow for a variety of reasons, including the CRC down in Blacksburg, which is this incubator that Chris is very familiar with, that is helping to grow the region. And so I think that diversity in our economy and the balance of Main Street versus big box, as well as some of the natural beauty that we have, has helped to attract some talent. And when I was a kid, everybody's talked about how fast you can get out of here. And now people are really happy to raise a family here.
And Chris, are you finding the same thing a little further south?
Yeah, I think that we in this area have reached this wonderful point where there is enough energy, enough people, enough of those real action makers to have some transformational change and to grow our region in an intentional, smart way, and to have a real opportunity for those who want to leave their mark, for those who want to make a difference, to improve their community and be able to look and see a tangible thing as a result of that. It's here in the Roanoke and New River Valleys. The biggest problem, as you said, for talent retention is not now a lack of available opportunity with whatever it is that you want to do, but now we are seeing that our infrastructure has not been able to accommodate the rising demand of people. So where we are in the NRV, Sam mentioned the Corporate Research Center, we have new companies that are coming online all the time, and we're finally starting to get to a point where commercialization is happening, so these businesses can grow, hire more people, be attractive for those Virginia Tech Radford students who graduate and are thinking, I want to go to a major city and make all this money. Well, we can at least provide a compensation package that's competitive and try and get people hooked on the idea of live in this community that is growing, that's burgeoning, be able to leave your mark. It is in a rural setting that appeals to a lot of people now for a lot of different reasons, but we don't have enough homes for people. We don't have enough reliable internet. We don't have enough healthcare options to make it viable for people who want advanced manufacturing. If that's ever able to be a new mix for us, a renewed mix rather for us in our economy. And so I think the main thing that we have to do is, how do we provide the infrastructure in a holistic, sustainable way that can allow our communities to now grow for the next century, I think, in some pretty amazing ways. We have a tremendous opportunity here to grow a wonderful community in a way that, in a way that we actually want to have input on.
And, these access issues, I think, are really almost a defining thing for the area. I remember when I was living in Alexandria and I came down for the first, my first rural retreat in Roanoke several years ago, and somebody that lived southwest of Blacksburg was telling me that they didn't have internet. And it took about 10 minutes for that to really register, because I was thinking, well, does that mean that you haven't set it up yet? Or, it's you're in a dead zone or whatever. And they said, no, we just don't have it down there. And we didn't have, and they didn't have cell phone access in certain portions. So how do we improve that? You guys go to Richmond as General Assembly members, and you've got a different perspective than people coming from Fairfax or Prince William. How do you impress upon your colleagues and other people who are making decisions that it really matters to get this infrastructure up and running, and not just in tech, but as you mentioned, Chris, in healthcare and so many other areas?
Yeah, so I think, as many of you all know, we are part-time legislators, and so we all have to try to figure out how to supplement our $17,000, $17,640 a year. I'm a business consultant, and so I'll do strategic planning, executive coaching for firms. And the concept that we try to talk about is something called creating shared value, which is, let's say that's the next level corporate social responsibility. What consumers and folks are looking for now is way more than just cutting that check at the end of the quarter to whatever the nonprofit or social enterprise may be. What investors and consumers are really looking for is your firm really at the center of its business, trying to alleviate social woes? The critical piece of that is that we're going to need to rely on private industry as well as the government to be able to stand up and say, hey, here are some answers. When earlier this year, 181 of the Fortune 500 CEOs declared for the first time in history that no, it shouldn't be the primary responsibility of companies to only focus on maximizing the wealth of the shareholder. They're beginning to introduce this conversation more holistically. And so when Chris is talking about infrastructure, for example, we want to try to figure out how can we work with the behemoths of the world like Amazon, but also many others in alleviating those social woes. So the easy checkers answer is we need to go to Richmond and demand more funding in an equitable way. That's clear. But the chess move here is, how do we use the changing dynamic that we see from investors and consumers and leverage that to try to make sure that we can invest in our communities?
Okay. And so right now, a lot of attention is being paid to the Postal Service, which seems like a very basic function and would certainly be a component of making a place viable, it seems like. What are you hearing on the ground, especially leading up to the election, about the viability of the Postal Service and its importance in your communities?
Well, I think we're still around here reeling with the effects of the closure of the distribution center, right? You know, so all of our mail going down to Greensboro and then coming back up. We've been used to some, you know, delays of a couple days of our mail now for, you know, going on 3-4 years. So what I think is really important now to tell everybody that the election, technically, if you want to say it's on November 3rd, now also in Virginia includes so many avenues now for early voting and for no excuse absentees. So actually today, you know, is when I and so many others now are saying that early voting and voting is beginning here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so hopefully with that amount of time, it means that everybody, you know, who wants to vote will be able to vote. I think the main thing is to have a plan. What do you want to do? And there are different strategies I know the party is trying to do for different communities based off of what, you know, their appetite for mail-in voting might be. You know, my feeling is if you can go in person and feel confident doing that, do it to ease the system that we're going to see with mail-in. But, you know, we now have an opportunity to do it. So if you want to make a plan to vote by mail, you know, you have plenty of time to do it, but act early because we've all seen the issues with the Postal Service this year and in years prior.
Or vote today.
That's right. First day of early voting, right?
That's right.
All right. So I want to get back to Richmond real quick. So how do you impress upon, let's say you've got some colleagues, either from either party, from around the state. How do you, what is your articulation of why it matters what happens in Southwest Virginia? How does it impact the Northern Virginia economy or area? How does it impact the rest of the state?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is there is a lot of weight, of course, in Northern Virginia, and much of our leadership comes out of Northern Virginia for sure. Northern Virginia, of course, does not represent the majority of the legislature. And it's important to be able to build coalitions across Virginia. Look, if you're busy trying to say this is why you need to pay attention to Roanoke or Southwest Virginia, making that case, it's really going to be a tough go. But if you're looking for partners, including in Northern Virginia, who are worried about equity and in lots of different lenses all around the Commonwealth, that's where you can begin to build alliances and really build coalitions. And Chris knows, you know, he's been in long enough now. He knows very well, as Chris Hurst knows, that, you know, it's issue by issue. You're building a coalition for this cause right now. And that's how we've been able to have success on the transportation package that went through, which I think was a huge deal as a great example, which is only a first step and wasn't perfect, but clearly that needed a broad coalition across the Commonwealth.
And that actually brings up a question that we got earlier from Gene in Winchester asking about I-81. That is something that obviously runs up the length of the state. It's 2 lanes in each direction for the most part, and lots of accidents, but also a primary arterial for distribution of goods. And it seems very unpredictable day by day what's going to be happening on I-81. How do we fix that? And are other legislators from around the state participating in that effort?
Yeah, well, you know, we were successful in 2018 in being able to get major funding for Interstate 81 and set up the Interstate 81 Committee, which is comprised of legislators and then also members of the planning districts, you know, for the regions along Interstate 81. And Sam and I are both on that committee. And so with increases in some of the gas tax revenues, we are able to leverage that to bond out for billions of dollars worth of projects over the next 10 years for Interstate 81. We're already seeing some of that occur with adding an auxiliary lane from mile markers 141 to 143 up in Harrisonburg. That is going to be a major center for the construction work that's going to be happening over the next 4 or 5 years. And we're going to be adding 3 lanes and a lot of what we would consider the metro congestion areas, which also includes, you know, from Roanoke to the New River Valley in many places. As you go into it and start to learn, the engineers will tell you don't have to have 3 lanes in both directions the entire length of Virginia. Virginia has the most miles of Interstate 81 than any other state. It's a huge, it's 300 miles. Everybody knows it, if you've driven on it. But we have to, we've already taken action. Now what you're going to see is that slow rolling and phase in of being able to do it. The money is tied to revenues that we raise from people actually using the road. And so we think that it's going to be pretty solvent no matter what happens with COVID and the downturn of the economy. It's actually going to be really important for us to continue that infrastructure work no matter what's going on with the rest of the economy. And that will be able to continue because there's no general funds from Virginia that goes towards the improvement projects.
Okay. That actually leads into a revenue question from John Cartmill. 2 weeks ago, Senator Survell warned the next legislative session would be impacted by the revenue shortfalls. Are there components of the Virginia Green New Deal that are revenue neutral?
Yeah, what a great question. So when you think about most of the investments that go into things like the projects that we talk about in the Green New Deal, we'll use, for example, the legislation that did pass this year, the Clean Economy Act. That is a $50 billion revenue bill. That is $50 billion in revenues for Dominion Energy. And so that'll produce about $12.5 billion in profits for them. So the question is, when we know for a fact that Virginia legislators have allowed Dominion and the utilities to overcharge us to the tune of a few billion dollars just in the past 10 years, this is money left on the table that is not going through our tax coffers. And so, the Green New Deal, what that does is intentionally pretty difficult, because what it does is it breaks down not only just census tracts, but what we call census blocks, and thinks about the investments and the workers that need to be lifted up community by community. And so while we have a great, primarily Northern Virginia crowd with us today on this webinar, you want to think about Western Virginia, Southwest Virginia, and really empathizing with a variety of voices. Also think about these urban centers and these census blocks, which are subsections of the tracts. And there's an intentionality of having a good chunk, 40 to 50% of these investments and individuals that are helped from those specific communities. Now, let's back up and let's think about, where does the $50 billion come from for Dominion? It comes from ratepayers. We have made this endorsement that we're going to allow these investments to happen. Some of those investments are good, and some of them are really just taking people for a ride over the course of this bill. So when you think about revenue neutral, especially in a time of COVID, what we've been doing is trying to be creative. So a great example is Delegate Jay Jones has put in a bill to mandate that the $500 million essentially stolen from us by Dominion is refunded in a small stimulus check back to folks. The governor has come out and endorsed something very similar. So we're all trying to figure out what resources are out there. And this is a great example of how you can approach things in a creative way.
All right. And that's fantastic to hear, by the way. It's also fantastic to hear that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, well, as long as we're talking about the environment, was canceled. Chris, I know you've been very vocal on pipelines. What is your view on that and on pipelines going forward?
Well, hopefully we have all woken up to the need that natural gas does not provide, and that we don't need to have these huge interstate natural gas pipelines in order to be that transition to an entirely clean economy. But especially for us in Virginia, I can understand if certain individuals who are trying to get into the White House might want to be making appeals to certain voters in certain states to try and win. I get that, but here for us, I think it's pretty clear that natural gas is not the way of the future and does not need to be a part of our portfolio. We saw that with the cancellation of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and that really wasn't because of any legislative action. As Sam can tell you, for being in a few years longer than I have, from when the Mountain Valley Pipeline was first announced, trying to be a legislator and to affect change on that particular issue is difficult because of the executive branch permitting at the federal level and at the state level. And so as much as we've tried to implore and beg and sometimes yell and scream, it has been through the court process, and it's been through the markets where we have seen, the greatest change, which I think most people would have said if there was a way for us to see these projects get canceled, that was probably going to be the most probable way. So all of those folks who have enjoined in lawsuits and everybody who has helped in delaying the project for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, I think that's the reason why it eventually was stopped. And so now we hope that with the Mountain Valley Pipeline, investors will see the same thing, that you're not going to get your ROI because the price of natural gas continues to be in the basement. It has not risen like people thought it would a few years ago. You are not going to get your money back. Project cost overruns have doubled the cost of the project. And quite frankly, solar, wind, other forms of energy like that are just more economical now. The window has passed. And that means we need to be aggressive in changing out of what we look for when we decide what energy sources we want.
And are you finding, I'm sorry, Sam, go ahead.
I just want to mention, Chris, I mean, what a joke the first time. This will be the second time, I think, in history that we're going into the Greek alphabet with regards to naming our storms and hurricanes. And when you look at the map, just go look at it today of the Atlantic Ocean and of North America. It is a disaster. And so the fierce urgency of now, and we often times are presented with this false dichotomy of, either we need to make these bold investments quickly now, but it'll hurt the economy, or, we need to stretch this thing out and make sure we don't hit the economy too hard. Everybody knows that that's BS. We know that we put in, we gave this $1 trillion tax cut to the rich. There's so much more that we can be doing. And clearly the climate is yelling at us saying it's already too late in some respects, but maybe we can try to mitigate this for the next generation.
Well, and that touches on, the cultural aspect of the environment, just like the cultural aspect of many things in the rural-urban divide. Are you finding that Southwest Virginians are embracing alternative energy sources, or are they still, have they moved toward that more, or is it still kind of thinking of coal, maybe natural gas, things like that?
I don't know. I tend to think that, people who still care about coal do so because it's in their bones, it's in their DNA, and we all have an understanding and appreciation of that. But I don't think anybody, when confronted with a choice, a realistic choice now, would stay with coal as the preferred, energy method. If you were to say, listen, if we're going to be but this is the problem, is that we haven't actually put our money where our mouth is on being able to transition some of these economies. But if anybody was confronted with the choice of, do you want to still live in a coal mining community and have that be what your family and community dynamic is, or do we want to maybe provide some solar panel installation on some of these mountaintop removal sites? Do we want to have a higher education or a healthcare focus based off of continuing development at UVA-Wise and Virginia Tech and VTCRI and Roanoke? I think that we shouldn't have this false dichotomy, this false choice that it has to be coal or some other type of energy. Right, it needs to be the economy. I think that you can have a natural dovetail, particularly with solar and the vast expanses of land that are needed for that. But there are other ways that we can diversify rural economies that aren't reliant just on coal or some facsimile. Gotcha.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. One of my main reasons for even wanting to do this program was to delve into the cultural issues, the thinking of people in more rural areas, and how we can bridge that divide, which I said earlier has existed forever. When you talk about the environment, when you talk about coal versus wind or solar, for example, how do you engage with people who may not see it that way right now? What are the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling of engagement, persuasion, building trust in these types of communities?
For me, it's, look, let's just kind of state the obvious. Here you have an Arab Muslim in the Bible Belt of Virginia getting elected into the state legislature. And even in Roanoke, has some relative diversity. It's 60% white, 30% black, and 10% other. And the only way to approach this is by building broad coalitions. And there's actually a science behind this. And there's two main concepts. First, morality. If you study moral psychology, maybe some people have read The Righteous Mind. There are these 6 facets of morality. And you figure out how people come to these decisions based upon fairness, oppression and liberty, authority, a variety of other pieces that we could talk about in depth. But then the second piece is to really understand how does that translate into the electorate. There's a great study called the Peoria Nine, which has broken down our electorate into these 9 major values buckets. And so when you want to build a coalition that is lasting, you think about how to discuss with the majority of these 9 buckets on a regular basis. People that were great at doing that were Obama, Clinton, Reagan, JFK. And it wasn't, if you think about Obama, he didn't communicate, for example, as a bleeding heart liberal all the time, right? He really was a great communicator, as for those who liked Reagan, he was obviously a great communicator as well. And so, finding that special sauce, and now we know that there's a science behind it. And when you think back to what happened in 2016, there's all kinds of rationalizations, and especially in our Democratic circles, and I know that this is a Democratic webinar, we want to talk about things like Bernie Bros, we want to talk about Russia. Look, we all know Russia's been meddling, but fundamentally, when we had the most qualified person in history running for president, who clearly would have done a much better job than what we have now, we should have beaten this person in a landslide, and we did not. And it all boils down to what you said earlier, Chris, is we lost trust. We unfortunately, our message was received as self-righteous. It was not trying to meet people where they're at. We obviously know more than they are. And it was, the cherry on top was, and I hate to bring this back up, but, when people remember that infamous term, the basket of deplorables. Mm-hmm. Look, that philosophy, I instantly thought in my mind, there are people that are just awful. And those are people you got to fight, but it's a small percentage. We all have inside of us this deplorable side. This is the truth, Chris. There's a dark side in all of us. And the question is, are we going to appeal to the darker side or appeal to people's hopes and aspirations as they move forward? It's real basic retail politics of meeting people where they're at.
And it is fascinating that this has kind of been distilled into science and measurables, as you're talking about. Chris, when you were running in 2017, obviously a tough district, there was some persuasion having to happen. How did you meet people where they were?
We knocked doors in Giles County, and even the Republicans who run for office for House delegates don't do that, right? So we did a real retail politics campaign and saw a tangible benefit from it. Sam was talking about an erosion of trust, and I really think that continues to be, the reason why people wouldn't vote for you or subscribe to your party is because, they don't trust it, or because they don't have, any knowledge of it intimately, because you haven't met them where they are, and that prevents trust from even beginning to form, rather than having it be eroded because of policies or actions that have happened in the past that have changed somebody's perception. I am not necessarily as optimistic as Sam is on some of this. I do think that unfortunately the last few months and year, 18 months has shown us that there really are a number of people who want to vote on issues and for reasons that we might think are not only unethical but are immoral. And I think that we have to acknowledge that there is a certain percentage of folks out there who do want an authoritarian state or do want a white supremacist state, and that has to be acknowledged because that is starting to infiltrate other people and other ideologies all the time. And so I think the greatest challenge that anybody faces who is trying to meet rural voters where they are, as I've been doing this, I've been thinking, are you a lion tamer? Are you trying to hold your hand out with food? What are you trying to do? And the reality is because you're not there, because, you haven't grown up, at least in my particular case, that if you're not there and omnipresent, you are fighting a losing battle. Because what is omnipresent for everybody in a rural area, even if they don't have good internet access, they probably still have a couple of bars on their phone. And it's Facebook. That I think is the biggest problem and the biggest thing that is staring us right in the face, is that no matter what we say, no matter how many op-eds we do in the weekly paper, no matter how many chicken dinners we show up to, they are continuing to get information in their Facebook feed that is not only inaccurate and untruthful, but is downright harmful and is starting to really persuade people in ways that typical political persuasion has never been effective in doing. And that is alarming to me, and I think is something that needs to be taken seriously.
So there is a phenomenon called the Obama-Trump voter, which, if we acknowledge that a certain percentage of the population will definitely vote Democrat, a certain portion will definitely vote Republican, and there's a sliver in the middle that seems somewhat persuadable. How much of that persuasion, Chris, you mentioned the importance of just showing up. Can that trust and that can that impression be made positively during a campaign cycle, or is this something that needs to go on for years or generations?
Yeah, so I think you can get there, right? So, but it has to be this consistent campaign, not just one individual campaign, but a capital C campaign, to try and make sure that people know who you are as a local candidate, and you're able to try and build those elements of trust. And trust, I think, is something that can be developed for a variety of reasons and be, on a total spectrum of strength. And when I was knocking on doors, I had a lot of people who trusted me because, I was their anchorman. And so I didn't have to I didn't have to know them prior personally. That was, an inherent dynamic in my race, that people still knew me. And I had some of those folks who voted for Trump, but voted for me, even put yard signs up, next to their Trump flag, because there was trust that was there. Trying to maintain that in the future, I found, has been exceedingly difficult. As I got elected and I started taking some votes that were Democratic votes, I got calls from these folks being like, "What the hell's going on?" And I'm like, "Well, what did you think?" They're like, "Well, we liked you." And I was like, "Well, I like you too, but you can
still like me."
Yeah, I got to vote the way I want to vote.
Right.
And so I've lost some of those people. But if a third of the people are going to vote straight D and a third are going to vote straight R, and you might have that third that are malleable, there are a million reasons why they might have voted for Donald Trump and Barack Obama. There really are. And of course, the New York Times and Washington Post wants to come out to Roanoke all the time and try and get inside the brain of that Obama-Trump voter. But their motivations are infinite. And so you have to do it at a retail level in order to have those conversations. Because when we do those walking packets, when we make those phone calls, especially when the candidate does it, the content you get back, the information you get back is very rich to know, okay, I don't need to worry about this person for the rest of the campaign because they're either never going to vote for me or I already locked them down. Who they voted for in the past is informative, but not really necessarily as relevant as always doing that good on the ground contact IDing every single race to see if you still have them. Because people, again, you have 60% who are, I think, ironclad, but as ironclad as they are, the other third, I really think are as flighty as anybody. And you have to figure out what's going to appeal to them at that particular point in time.
So you're saying those photo ops that Mark Zuckerberg did on tractors after 2016 aren't going to get it done?
I don't think so. I will say, when you talk to a population of people that have been disenfranchised, that have been lied to, that have been put down, you look at some of the union busting that was done during the coal mines, back around the turn of the century, that gave us the term redneck in the first place. You do have a long way to go. That's the one part of hillbilly elegy I might actually agree with, is that you do have to put in some time, because trust is not given. It's something that takes a while to earn and can really be lost very, very quickly, because people are used to being disappointed and let down. And as soon as you do it to them, it becomes very difficult for you to try and persuade them that you're still different from the other folks in positions of power who have let them down in the past.
Right. All right, that leads into a question from Nancy Nigerian. Nancy, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. I think this is kind of moving us toward issues a little bit, but in the same general vein of what we're talking about. Are there some general themes those of us working to bring Democratic legislatures across the county or the country may draw on to better connect with rural voters nationally and in other states?
Yeah, I think so. When we good thing about Democrats is that we believe in science. And Chris Hurst is right. I'm a bit of an idealist, but I'll carry that torch proudly. I would argue that voting, much like many other decisions, comes down to one major issue, which is safety. And when we think about going back to those days of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people are trying to answer this question of, the safety of my physiological needs, the safety of, the belonging in my tribe. And so you can address it using one of two major strategies: fear or trust. Fear is a stronger emotion, but trust is right behind it. And so building those relationships, if you think back to the way, as Chris had mentioned, the unions in their heyday weren't super strong because of the issues that they stood for. They were super strong because your problem was their problem. And they were in your living rooms making sure that you were taken care of. And they had a network. And whenever there was an issue, you knew that you could go through that network to try to find some resolution. And of course, it wasn't always pretty, but there was this trust factor, where you contrast that with what is the kind of current approach of the Democratic Party. The way we campaign is two things: money and votes. So that's when you contact me, when you want money or votes. Nobody gives a damn about me, about what's happening in my life. What you want to do is create a focus group and try to come up with some issues when issues don't win elections. Voting is an emotional decision. And so until we meet people where they're at emotionally, we're going to continue to struggle. And let me think about 2020 for a moment. I'm hoping while there is a clear path for President Trump to be reelected, I'm hoping that we win. But even when we win, what's the sustainability here as we move forward? I really struggle with that.
Yeah, and so much of what you guys are both talking about is just soft skills, right? I mean, Chris mentioned Facebook, or if you watch 24-hour news, it's really just one or the other. There's very little of the bridging of the gap that we're talking about, which is the sort of blocking and tackling of meeting people, going out. And it's particularly challenging in the areas where you live, and probably especially you, Chris, because of the distance between houses. In Northern Virginia, you can knock out 50 doors in 2 hours. That's a little tougher in Giles County, I assume.
I think one of the challenges we'll continue to see, right? So you have Bristol, and then Marion, Radford, Woodville, all the way on up past Roanoke and Harrisonburg. Those city centers along 81, I think, are going to be the places where we can grow population. But there is a ton of friction between the suburban community that is growing, and then where I am with the college students, and then with people who live in the rural communities, and trying to address all of their issues and trying to represent all of them equally all the time is a very difficult challenge. I think Sam really touched on it, and this is something that I think Democrats need to continue to realize, which is, the issues really don't matter. That voters, when it comes down to it, he's absolutely right. It is an emotional decision. It's not a logical decision for a tremendous amount of people, but particularly when we're looking at the communities we serve. And so they really want to know is, do you have their back? And that's where the trust comes in, because they don't really care so much about the issues. I know, because polling, even on the things that we think are the most extreme, guns and abortion, when we do polling, the enthusiasm on those issues is not that high at all, really. What people, I think, are mainly motivated by is, do you have my back? And if you don't have my back, I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of reasons why you don't, that are going to be about the issues. And if you do have my back, I know you have my back, and I'm going to come up with reasons why you defend me on the issues. But the issues are used as justification for that central feeling of, do you have my back? And that is something where soft skills are incredibly important, because you have to show empathy. You have to show sympathy. You have to show an understanding. And then you also have to show an effort to want to improve the situation. As Sam said with the unions, no matter what the situation is, it might not be the same issue that mine is, because I'm a college student and you live in a rural community, right? But I still need to convey that message that I have your back. And that is a very difficult challenge to do when people have not felt that anyone has had their back for a long time.
So apart from just straight up listening and empathizing, how do you convince somebody that you have their back, at least enough that they might check the box for you?
I don't think anybody has a formula besides what we know from traditional forms of communication, right? That all of the elements of forensics and rhetoric do play into that in order to try and engender goodwill through communication. But I have not really found a particular effective mass strategy that has worked. You talked about running a persuasion race when I first ran in 2017. I thought that there was going to be some element of persuasion, right? Taking those undecided voters or lean Republicans and flip them over to a Democratic side. It virtually never happened. And I think with the polarization that we have now in the country, that this era of polarization that we are in the middle of and are hoping to get out of, but do not see that light at the end of the tunnel anywhere close. We need to understand that people are not malleable to persuasion as much as they might have been in the past, and so you just need to turn them out. And so every single race, I think, in the foreseeable future is going to be a turnout race. It is basically saying we are unabashed in what we believe. We are going to fight. We are going to convey an emotion that shows effort, that shows intention, that shows responsibility and accountability. But if you're with me, great. And if you're not, I'm not really going to spend a whole lot of time trying to convince you need to come to me, because what I need to do, especially if we're successful in getting rid of Donald Trump of the White House, is convincing all of the people who've been active the last 4 years that they need to continue to be active and continue to vote in order to make sure that progress can continue. I'm worried a hell of a lot more about all of the folks who have voted Democrat in the last 4 years who are not going to show up to the polls anymore than I am about anybody who has been voting Republican consistently that now I'm going to try and persuade to vote for me.
Interesting. Okay.
To add to that, Chris, first, I would like for us to challenge the traditional notion of, maybe third, because we know that nearly the majority, or at least well over 40% of potential voters just didn't vote. And so when we talked about the 9 voting buckets, the 9 values buckets, it wasn't 9 buckets of those who vote, it was 9 of those who can vote. And to figure out what happens, why did 45% of people sit on the sidelines in the presidential election? I think that is important. Second, the reason why Chris Hurst gets frustrated when he's going to those leading Republicans and trying to promise them something better because he genuinely can, as a delegate, offer something better, is because it's almost like, think about a Trader Joe's. You all are business people. When I go to any Trader Joe's, I'm going to pretty much get the same service, the same selection, the same quality, and I'm a Trader Joe's fan. Now, I don't care how nice my friend is that works at Hardee's. I'm not going to Hardee's. I just don't like the brand, right? It's just not for me. Mm-hmm. So the problem is that what the frustration that many candidates have is they keep butting up against. They feel like they're caught in the Hardee's brand trying to promise something better. But we all know that you've got to build a consistent brand across the board as we move forward. And I will say, Chris, to your original question of what is something that we can offer. You know, I have a pretty poor district that I represent down here. And I don't tell people what I do. I give them my card and I say, call me when you need help. That's it. Just contact my office. Their trash doesn't get taken out. They have a problem with immigration. Neither of those fit into our legislative bucket. It doesn't matter. We're going to case manage all of it. We're going to be their liaison. To me, it's that simple. Like if the Democratic Party is like, hey, you need help? Let's do it. What are we going to do? Imagine if we took part of the $400 million we spend in Virginia on a 4-year election cycle as a Democratic Party, and we put a portion of that into traditional kind of union organizing work instead of one ad after another, trying to find new ways of manipulating people by spam texting them. Imagine if we really gave a damn where that would take us. That's where we really need to challenge ourselves.
No, that's a great point. And if you do solve a problem for somebody, then that is about as tangible as it gets, that you've got their back.
With you forever.
Yeah. Question from Lauren Hershey. He's asking about special session, but I think it also applies to 2020 and in general. And it has to do with a little more detailed about the technical components of outreach. How do you get your messages out to the broader community? Newspaper op-eds, mailings, social media, socially distanced outdoor events, particularly right now during COVID?
Yes, we've tried anything and everything that we think would be safe and responsible to do. So a lot of what we do traditionally still has been very viable, even if you're not able to meet in person. Posting on social media, doing op-eds in the local papers, working with local reporters to make sure that the work that you're doing is getting covered, sending out letters to new registered voters, welcoming them to the district and thanking them for getting registered, right? Those are all things that we've done before, things we can do now. I think the real challenge is, you know, when this all happened, a lot of us may have heard of Zoom or have used Zoom in the past, but it is amazing to me how now, a year ago, if somebody wanted to talk to me about a particular issue, they'd call me on the phone. Now they want to schedule a Zoom meeting. I don't know what's so special about doing a Zoom meeting, but it seems like everybody just wants to do it. Our challenge is, how do we take that and then meet people where they are, right? So what I would encourage anybody who's in this space to do is do exactly, Chris, like what you did, right? Let's say, okay, we all are pretty much handcuffed to our computers at some point during the day, and we have all really quickly adopted these new forms of communication as the way forward. And once we are able to move back freely in communities, I'm sure it'll drop off a little bit. But I think we'll do a lot of this in the future. Businesses all over are trying to figure out, does this mean we don't need to have as much office space? Does this mean we can offer employees the ability to work from home, right? So I really think that video conferencing, video communication will be the next step forward that we'll continue to see throughout the rest of this year. And for, you know, the races we have in Virginia next year, I would say get ready for a deluge of, you know, things to do over Zoom, right? So for everybody that I normally call and ask for patronage in Northern Virginia, and you know, we don't get to really see each other at all, there is something really novel and nice about, you know, the face-to-face interaction. And so I think we'll be challenged to use this new format in original and creative ways in the future. but that this will really be something that stays with us. I do not like Nick Freitas much, but who's running against Abby Spanberger in the 7th Congressional District, but I respect him for this. If you go and see his Twitter or Facebook feed, he has a complete set, dressed set with lighting, with supers, of information below, with Facebook questions coming in live as he's talking. That is the future for communicating, I think, as a politician, is saying, okay, we are going to try and be native and adopt video. And if you go and look at his stuff, it's really impressive. And when you look at how good he is at communicating and how the window dressing looks professional, I think it really should be a wake-up call for all of us that he can say a lot of inflammatory and outright, immoral things, but because he's adapted to the new environment and he looks the part, people are starting to buy it. And we can do that too. We just need to really lean in and embrace the new format.
Yeah, and of course, you and I as former TV guys can appreciate some good lighting and a decent backdrop, I'm sure.
I have not turned on my ring light just because it's a little blinding in the morning. I don't have the good natural light in here like Sam does, but
Oh no, I've got a light.
Oh, he's got the ring. Okay, so there you go. Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. There you go.
Right. So this is all stuff that I think people are ready to participate in and adopt to, because it's so ubiquitous now with how we record videos and share videos as people.
Yeah, there is a tremendous amount of potential, and it's just a matter of people getting acclimated to it and choosing to make the most of it. We're coming up on 10:30. I told you guys it would be an hour. I appreciate all the questions that have come in. We didn't get to all of them. Unfortunately, there were some great ones. We'd love to maybe do this again sometime down the road, but I can't let you guys go without asking you what you're hearing on the ground as it pertains to 2020. We've covered a range of issues: trust, communication, got your back, you name it. Donald Trump has done well with rural voters. Are you hearing on the ground that people are disenchanted that might have voted for him before? Are you hearing that they're going to come out strong for him again? What is it that you are hearing in your districts?
In my district, which is about 50-50 R&D, I really don't see as much enthusiasm as I did, back in 2016 for Donald Trump. I think that you have people who put out the perfunctory signs. You have, the people that are trying to organize for him and register voters and all that kind of stuff. But I just don't see it being nearly as much of a groundswell as I did 4 years ago.
Sam, how about you?
Yeah, I think we have lots of reasons to actually be concerned. I'm very interested in our closing argument here. I think that that'll be important. And so speaking objectively, for example, in 2008, about 4% of African Americans did not vote for President Obama. He was able to get 96% of the black vote. Currently, based on one poll, Trump is polling 14% with African Americans. Now, it doesn't sound like a big number, but if you start to think about some of these communities for lots of different reasons, whether it be the Cuban American, being Arab American, I mean, there's a certain clique of people who the system isn't working for them. And so you have an authoritarian who's coming out there and able to say, I mean, he wrote me a letter saying, hey, remember that check you got in April or so? That was for me, when we know that that's not the truth. And it's like, well, the system didn't work, but at least I got a check. I think it's important for us to dig down deep. And I would tell, if I was in the inner circles of the Biden campaign, this is what I would say. I would let Biden dig back to his roots and just let him be this Uncle Joe that people can gravitate towards, that kind of working class, raw of the earth, appeal, I think works really well with a lot of folks who are just looking for, hey, give me some safety here. Things are going to be all right, and we're going to figure this thing out together. So I hope we don't double down, because if we've learned anything anything over the past 4 years. People do not care what Donald Trump says or does. They do not care anymore. It's done. We've all seen it. We know the truth, and either it speaks to you or it doesn't. Now we have to inspire folks to come in our direction, and I'm hoping that that will be our closing argument.
Well, that's a great point. We are hopeful, of course. It was my impression in 2016 that Trump's support was being undercounted. I don't get that sense from the polls this time. What brings me hope is two things. One is the time between when COVID started and things have materialized, and we've been talking about USPS and all these issues over several months. It's not like they happened the week before the election and nobody has had time to react to them. So I think that's a silver lining in all this. And I also think that a lot of people that sat on the sidelines, I hope will come out in 2020 and feel a sense of urgency that they might not have in 2016. So we will see how it goes. So with that said, Delegate Sam Rasoul, Delegate Chris Hurst, thank you so much. You guys are certainly two of the very thoughtful elected leaders in Virginia. I know it's a tough road to hoe, to be a political minority, if you will, in a section of the state that doesn't have as many Democrats, but you're doing great work. Thank you for joining us this morning and for your thoughtful answers. Thanks to everybody at home for joining us as well. And DemBiz will be back very soon with another webinar. In the meantime, take care and we'll see you soon.